All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. Can you all see the slide? The presentation slide? Great. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I am so excited about the individuals we have on the panel today, and I think you all will find what they share really fascinating, and hopefully there will be some takeaways for you. I think there will be in terms of the kind of work that they do to support and strengthen communities around the state. So real quickly, Volunteer Florida, I know most of you are extremely familiar with us. We're the state service agency for Florida, lead agency for national service and volunteerism, as well as has audio, but God, hold on one second. Someone had a quick question. You all can hear me fine, right? Okay. So every state has a state service commission. Sometimes people aren't sure kind of how to connect us. And we are established in statute. We are a tiny state agency. There are about 18 of us, but focusing in on national service, which is AmeriCorps. And that is a federal national service agency. So we are really proud to have about 40 of those programs around the state and about 1,600 individuals who are members, doing great work across the state, and then just championing volunteerism in general. And that's kind of my focus, promoting volunteerism through training and resources. And then, which Jessica is very familiar with, we are the lead agency for volunteers and donations before, during, and after disasters, big picture. So you will be hearing from Jessica, I'm sure, some components of that in her work. So that's a little bit about us. Would love to hear from you. Many of you I have great relationships with and partnerships, but anything that you'd like to connect with me on, please feel free to do that, because I am happy to support the field, and that's my job. So I want to introduce our folks today. I'm going to try to spotlight them so that it's just them. The screen. So give me just a moment. Okay, so we've got everyone right now, and I'm going to see if I can spotlight. Hi, Sharon. And then let's see if I can add spot. Oh, there we go. I think I did it. I'm doing it. Thank you all for your patience here. I use Zoom all the time and I still am not sure why I don't know certain things about it. All right, so we've got all 4 of you, and then I'm just going to be tiny over in the corner here because I want to focus on each of you. So I would love for you all to introduce yourselves. Speak slowly because some of you have a long office title as well as the bigger picture of where you work. So I know we put that on the slide, but would love to hear that. And then we'll go into a little bit more about what each of you does. So Sharon, why don't you start?
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here and to talk about volunteer engagement. I am Sharon Tatum. I am the volunteer program manager for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And if you know anything about the Fish and Wildlife Commission, the acronym is FWC. So if you hear me refer to that, that's what I mean. I'm referring to the entire commission. We have lots of divisions within our commission, and I'm housed within the Division of Habitat and Species Conservation. And then within that, lots of layers. I'm in the Public Access Services Office, and our role is to serve across the entire agency, across all divisions, and provide volunteer support in different kinds of ways, which we'll talk about more later. Thank you.
I guess I'll go next. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for everything you do to serve volunteers in your organizations. My role or my title is Program Manager of Friends Groups. Friends Groups are the nonprofits associated with a state park. We have 83 Friends Groups or nonprofits attached to one or more of our 175 state parks. We have over 20,000 volunteers a year in state parks and 1.2 million hours of service. And my job, I'm in Tallahassee, Florida, in the headquarters office of Florida State Parks. So, and I coordinate with our 5 districts to everything having to do with volunteer management cycle.
Everything having to do. Thank you, Christine. And Jessica.
There we go. Good morning, everybody. Very glad to be here. As the slide said, my name is Jessica Geib. I actually work for Pinellas County Human Services, which is a unique role. I serve as the department emergency manager. So I get to kind of play back and forth between our emergency management department and our human services. And I get to work with all of the nonprofit partners that we engage with every day in the work that human services does. And then I want to put on my second hat, which is always a juggling act, but I also chair the Florida VOAD, which is the Florida Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. We are the organization that is essentially the umbrella of all of the nonprofit work that goes on before disaster and then during response and recovery. So we're an organization of about 100 different organizations at all different levels, both national nonprofits all the way down to our local groups that serve in all sorts of different aspects, engaging after disaster and during. So happy to be here.
Wow, thank you. And I do want to emphasize every one of our panelists talks about engaging nonprofits. So you will hear throughout this conversation, partnership, relationship, working with both the independent nonprofit sector and Renee and I were talking about private sector connections. And part of why we wanted to do a workshop like this is, Jessica, do you see that chat? Okay, perfect. If you'll do that. Was to really emphasize that, yes, there are some unique components, certainly, to government groups and how they mobilize volunteers and the structure of their organization so that they can have volunteers strengthen our communities. And there's lots of connection here. Government groups are not siloed, I think, in the way a lot of people assume that they are. And so this is a wonderful group of individuals, both because of the leadership that they exhibit, and also because of their willingness and thinking outside of the box when it comes to cross-sector connection. So I want to have you guys talk about kind of the structure of volunteer engagement in your organization. Most of you are not directly mobilizing volunteers necessarily, but you are connected in a bigger picture way to that mobilization. So I'd love to hear about what that looks like for you. And also just kind of note, we've got conservation and environmental protection, 2 distinct things, but kind of connected. We also have emergency management, and then we have neighborhood relations. So a really great combination. I think some of what the substance is of what you all do also affects what how volunteerism works for you. So Sharon, the structure here, kind of where you are in the whole kind of not hierarchy, but space would be great. Let's hear about that.
Right. Sure. So I'll share the model that we have right now for FWC. So my role is to be a resource to all staff across the state if they want to engage volunteers into a specific project or a need. Sometimes we have priority needs that come down from leadership, or if there is an emergency need, maybe there is a specific species that is experiencing something drastic and there's a need to immobilize volunteers in order to help with that. So we're looking at those priorities that staff share with us and that other leaders share with us within the agency. And I also manage a team who are positioned in each of our regional offices. So we have 5 regions that the FWC divides the state into. And we have a member placed in each of those regions, and they work on a regional level to work with staff to engage volunteers into projects. And they could work in a variety of ways. They could just be a consultant to that person. I want to know how to bring volunteers into this specific project. How do I do it? They could say, I just need to know what the paperwork's all about, or the policy. We could help them in that respect as well. Or maybe they have other priorities that they need to work on. So they're going to say, I want you to develop this project, manage it, train my volunteers to do it, and, you know, wrap those results up, send those back to the volunteers, send those results back to the community. And I can go work on the other priorities that I'm tasked with, and I'll check in with you. So most of my, all of my staff are biologists, but they also have a strong community relations and volunteer engagement component to their role and to their position and their experience coming in. And so they serve kind of on that regional level. And so my role is more of the agency wide, making sure that we are adhering to policies, thinking outside the box as far as who can we partner with to make this project happen, who can we partner with and build a relationship with in order to resolve a human wildlife conflict potentially. So a lot of what I do is facilitating and connecting and presenting and sharing and hoping that people are working together in the way that they need to be. Thank you.
No, that is wonderful. I was wondering in the chat, let me know how many of you all were aware of the idea of a volunteer program at Florida Wildlife Conservation Commission. Did I get that right, Sharon?
Yes.
Sometimes I say the wrong.
You could just say
FWC.
FWC is easy.
FWC. So in the chat, let me know, were you aware of kind of the significant component role that volunteerism plays in at FWC? No? I'm just curious.
I will say too, Javita, that there are a lot of staff within the agency that manage volunteers. It's not one of their position requirements, but they do it because they believe in it, and they also believe it's going to help them achieve their goals. So, so we're empowering them to be better at what they do, and also making sure that the volunteers have a good experience. So there's lots of staff across the agency that do this, and it's not necessarily built in as a, if you know government, everything's written out. This is your role. This is your exactly what you do. And sometimes that's not exactly written in, but that's how, because of our limited resources, that's how we accomplish what we need to accomplish.
And that's huge, that there's a culture of volunteerism and that you're able to provide proactively those resources very quickly to them, and that you are full-time focused on this component. And I know there are this role, and I know there are all kinds of dynamics, and you have to navigate those things. But, you know, this is something that is seen by your leadership as something that is going to help you fulfill your mission with the limited resources you have. And I am thankful that that's a reality. So Christine, let's hear from you about kind of the structure and where you are.
Yeah, so I'm in the headquarters in Tallahassee. I'm a one-man show for the state park. So there's 170 state parks, and I coordinate with the districts. So we have also 5 districts, and those district managers are tasked with volunteer management as well as training, and they often have other duties. So it's very rare that within the Park Service that there's solely a volunteer manager for a park, though that is a role that gets a little bit bump in pay. Within the parks themselves, there's about 170 people who are charged with the volunteer program for their park. So, but they have other ranger type duties as well, most often. I mean, we're always multitasking.
Got it.
So that's really the structure of it. My job is policy and guidance for the whole state, make sure that, we're adhering to the policies, or I'm interpreting the policies to them as they have questions. I try to make sure that the parks are liaising with their districts first before they come to me. And then, if there are problems with volunteers, like you've got to terminate a volunteer or ban a volunteer, the phone will start ringing in Tallahassee, and I'll have to deal with that kind of stuff. And same thing, if there's a flaming cannonball from policy and direction from above, then that typically will come to me and to figure it out. And I try to shield our districts and our parks from that as much as possible, because they have a lot to do in the park. So, Florida State Parks are serving almost 32 million visitors a year. And so volunteers are key to our operations. They work alongside staff. That's really their role in all areas of our operations. And we talk about the big five. The big five are maintenance, protection, which is safety, resource management, visitor service, and maintenance. Hopefully I got all five of it. So that's how we code our time as well for volunteers as well as staff. So we can roll up our numbers for all of the big five, and our volunteer roles are in those categories as well. So I hope that helps.
No, that's great. Thank you, Christine. And I really like that you said volunteers work alongside staff. That term, I think, is really important in terms of how we see volunteers. They are not volunteers that are working for us, that they are alongside. And I think you will hear that you already have from both Christine and Sharon, but that's really a key part of this, of mobilizing volunteers for the mission of these government groups. So we'll go to Renee next. Wait, and so I'm so sorry, Jessica, Pinellas is St. Pete as well, right?
Yeah, we're St. Pete Clearwater. So, but we're a team. Yep.
Okay, got it. All right, Renee, let's hear about what you do.
Sure, and I'll just start off by introducing myself. I'm Renee Van Sickle, the neighborhood specialist for the city of St. Petersburg, which is in Pinellas County. We are the largest city of 24 municipalities within the county. Our city's volunteer program is called ICANN, which is an acronym for Involved Citizens Active in Neighborhoods. In our office, we're actually the liaison between neighborhood associations and business associations. So those associations are solely comprised of volunteers. So we develop a lot of relations through that office, but through our ICANN volunteer program, I am charged with connecting people to volunteer opportunities. We do not minimize those opportunities to just city volunteer opportunities. I connect them with whatever their interests are. So I actually connect with a lot of nonprofits. I'm meeting with them all the time, finding out what is available throughout the city and connecting people to what they're interested to. Specific to the volunteer opportunities that we have at the city, those are managed by their respective departments. I do not manage those volunteers. However, their data is reported to our office, and we do gather and report on that data I do manage a annual Care Fest event, which is a day of community service. We get anywhere from 300 to 500 volunteers, and it's an annual event we've done since 2002 that we partner with Somebody Cares Tampa Bay on, who is a Christian nonprofit. So that's what management of volunteers for me looks like. In addition, I'm working with schools. We've got several colleges in our city. And so I try to also assist them. Some of them don't have the bandwidth to monitor their volunteer service that they offer. So I'm actually working with 2 of the colleges right now to have our ICANN form placed on their school's website to kind of assist them with that need and relieve them of the duty, because it's something that we're already doing here.
This is fantastic. Thank you so much, Renee. And I did forget to have you introduce yourself. I really apologize for that. I get ahead of myself because I'm so excited about you lovely folks. And this is, this is a local role that Renee has. So it's interesting to see the differences statewide, connection and leadership, and then also on the city or county level. And when I was talking to Renee and she said, I connect people with nonprofits, I was asking her, okay, through your portal. And she said, no, I actually talk to each of these individuals who have a need and connect them. And again, something that a lot of folks wouldn't assume that a government entity would do, that level of support and service. In addition to actual in-person meetings in connection with nonprofits, so that she can develop relationships, not just transactional work, although that is important. And sometimes that's the reality is, what can you offer? What can I offer? Let's quickly get this connected. But she is able to really dig in her community and have closer relationships. And that's a really cool thing that's been designed where she is. So I just wanted to highlight that about what she shared. All right, thank you, Jessica.
Great. So I mentioned I have kind of a unique role, and my brain works like an emergency manager. So we are in hurricane season, but even when we're not, I'm constantly thinking about, but what does that mean for everyone, right? And the one thing that I love that everybody mentioned is we connect. We're connecting people to projects. We're connecting organizations to opportunities. And that's really exactly what I do, but I put that emergency management cap on. And so with the work that we're doing with our nonprofits, connecting volunteers to opportunities, it's kind of the okay, and then what? So what happens when our community is impacted with an emergency? What does disaster volunteering look like for your organization? And I love that the organizations we have on here are very non-traditional disaster, right? You don't traditionally think Florida State Parks has anything to do with disaster response. But then the reality is, every organization that touches someone, every organization, whether government, nonprofit, private, it has an impact from a disaster. And so there's an opportunity there for a volunteer to give an hour. And the really cool thing about disaster volunteering is that hour is worth money, which can go back to your local government to help meet their FEMA match. So that's why I think it's really amazing, the opportunity to say, oh, your crisis pregnancy center, what happens after disaster? Because every nonprofit will have a touch after disaster. How can you take what you're doing every day and one, prepare, but also be ready to respond to your clients, for your volunteers, and what do those opportunities look like after a disaster hits? And then also, how do you capture that information? So really what I do is a lot of just educating our partners, working with our partners, helping them understand what their role will be after disaster, and helping them kind of adjust their thinking to understanding that, hey, wait, I am a nonprofit disaster responder. I do have a role in response and recovery. How can I get my organization to shift our thinking to become a culture of preparedness and a culture of response? Because then in the end, right, the whole community benefits from that. So I don't know that there's really necessarily a structure in place, but it's a shift in mindset of We don't just respond when someone's in a pregnancy crisis or when someone needs, you know, a loaf of bread, but we're responsible for responding all of the time. What happens when we add a disaster to that? So I like to think it's a neat opportunity. And again, we touch all sectors. And yeah, so you can tell I love talking about it, but
Thank you, Jessica. I'm not on mute. Thank you for that. So many trends here, through lines in terms of what each of these ladies do in their work. Again, with partnerships and relationships. And again, that connection between all three sectors being really important. And it's not insular, the work that they're doing. Again, not siloed. Everyone's talked about different departments. Everyone's talked about community relationships. And just because neighborhood is in the name, or community is in the name, or volunteerism is in the name, it doesn't mean that people understand what that is or how it could affect them in really positive ways, or give them opportunities to volunteer. And so that's part of what I wanted to highlight here is that the way you all are navigating the work that you do is so beneficial to communities, and that the public needs to see and be connected to the work that you all do. So this is wonderful. All of the work that you all do is really extraordinary. I say that personally and professionally, knowing you all. So I wanted to talk about, I hear the word training and the word education from all of you because of who you work with. And you know, Christine mentioned the volunteer cycle. So I'll share with you all that there are a couple of versions of it, but it typically includes strategic planning, and that's before recruitment, because most people start with recruitment. I need volunteers, but why do you need them? How will you manage them? All of those things. Planning comes before that. And then we have recruitment, onboarding, orientation, supervision, and management, and also retention. There's a couple other things depending on which part of the cycle or which example or template of the cycle you're familiar with. So that's what you all are either directly connected with, or you see and are aware of, and helping to provide the resources people need. So I'd love to ask, or I am asking, just to roll back what I was talking about, training and education. What does that look like? And part of this is, where are you getting your information that you're able to share with individuals about volunteerism? Are you Googling things? Is there information that's coming down from other leadership? How do you know what you know in order to support either the community or inside your organization, those who are volunteering, who are managers of volunteers? So yeah, there's information, education that's part of this. So how do you do that? Where are you getting that information? So anyone can start on that.
I'll hop in.
That's
Yeah, I saw a question in the chat that said they were interested in disaster-related guidance and activities. So I think we have a mixed group who's tuning in. I would recommend any of our nonprofit partners that are on, connect with your local emergency management department. Each community has a robust training and education program through your government emergency management. They want to know who you are. The nonprofit world has fought a long time to have a seat at the emergency management table, and we're there. So please reach out to them, connect with them, ask about how your organization specifically fits into the big picture. Educate yourself on what the picture of emergency response recovery looks like, because it's a very complex system. And we see people, oh, I want to jump in and donate, but if you don't understand the process, you sometimes can be a cog in that wheel. And then I want to say for our government partners that are on, in the same fold, educate yourself on what the nonprofits do and the work that they do, and find ways that you can take their skill set and their volunteers, their resources, and plug them into our own response and recovery. The more classes that you can take about how nonprofits work and the work that they do and how they train their volunteers, the better you can understand how that all folds together to make the big picture. So I would say reach out and shake each other's hands, and put the time in to learn and take advantage of the trainings that both sides of the spectrum offer.
That's great. And I will add some resources to our to the follow-up email that I'll share with you all that have to do specifically with what Jessica was talking about. And that was my training a couple of months ago, was this exact thing. You are not immune in terms of leading the charge when it comes to community awareness about disasters and about emergency management. And so some of what I've learned from Jessica, from our EM director, I will send along some of that information to you all in case it's of interest to all. How to reach them for questions, or do you have a website? So I will ask them each about website and then email connection. It may not be them necessarily based on how their structure works. And then I will put that in an email, that after email to you all. So presenters, I will talk to you all about that and who's the best person to contact, whether it's you or someone else. So great question. Thank you for asking about that and how to connect, Melanie. Okay, so who else? Training, education. How are you disseminating that information? Where are you getting it from? Because it needs to be valuable, it needs to be valid, it needs to be reliable when it comes to being, shared with other people. This is important that whatever you're talking about has to do with your own credibility in sharing that information. So someone else share about training. Yeah, Sharon.
I can share a little bit. So a lot of what we're also doing is teaching staff how to be better volunteer managers. And so in order to get that information, I also look to other state agencies. So Christine and I have spoken in the past, and I'm like, how do you do this? What's Parks doing? What's Parks doing? What's FWC doing?
Right.
And so just to gauge, are we operating similarly? Is there some good component that I can add to what I'm doing with FWC that's, vice versa? We're also part of an association that's now called the Association for Advancing Participatory Sciences. And so a lot of that component involves volunteering. And so we get a lot of good information and a lot of good contacts and thinking outside of the box from the nonprofit world all the way to academia, all the way to government and state agencies. So a lot of what we do is as science research. So engaging our volunteers in more of that opportunity is something that we like to get a lot of good info from and bring that back. So we just had a recent conference and we're like trying to package that up, and how do we share that with the agency so that they can get some good information from this. We do have a volunteer handbook, we do have a volunteer manager's book, but in my opinion, we're working to revamp those. I think it's time. And so they need a good look-see, and could we promote those in a different way? Things have changed. These are about 10 to 12 years old. So what are some ways we can share this information in a better avenue and a better path? And then also my staff are typically, if they're working on a project that's very specific to a certain need, a staff member will train them. So for example, in the South region, one of my staff runs volunteers who assist with Python captures. So he's a biologist, but he needs to be trained on that technique and that protocol. And so the staff member will train him, he's ready to roll. He can now engage volunteers to participate in that type of an activity. And so it depends on what's necessary and what's needed. But I also look to Volunteer Florida for good resources too if I have a question and I'm thinking, okay, I haven't been able to find this. Can you help me look for some resources on this particular thing? I like to participate in volunteer management courses, anything that I can, you know, bring back that can improve how we operate with each other and how we operate with the community. I think one of the things that we're really trying to focus on is bringing back our results and our good work that we've done with volunteers to the public. You know, if you do a lot of scientific research, a lot of time it just sits there, and for good reasons. Sometimes nothing's happening, but you still need the data. The data is important, even if there's no result to it. But it's trying to package that up and get biologists to say, okay, we need to give something back to the public and to the volunteers that are part of this effort. So we're really trying to focus on that avenue. So lots of training and lots of resources are coming to us to be able to do that in a better way.
I'm writing furiously, so if I pause, that's what I'm doing. And, you know, mentioning kind of the academic component is really interesting. There's so much that might be in the ivory tower of academia, that may be in Googling, that may be in hopefully, you know, what we do. Sharon and I have known each other for a long time and have had some great conversations. She had me talk about the research that we did on the nature of volunteerism with her volunteer managers. You know, that is my role, and having those virtual opportunities is something that I do regularly. But part of it is knowing where to go to find the information, you know, that you need. And both Jessica and Sharon are talking about looking at other networks, looking at other organizations as well, in order to educate and to share. So Christine, Renee, training, how do you get the information that you disseminate to other people? Because again, it needs to be reliable. You don't just sort of wing it. We wing it sometimes because we have to. So flaming cannonball, hey, we're pretty sure this is the best thing, but don't, you know, give it a huge block of salt, not even a grain. And we have to disclaim that as best we can. But when you are organizing information that you can share with others, either the people you're managing, the people who come to you because of the work that you do, how do you train or educate? Where are you getting the resources to share information?
Well, I will say I get a lot of it straight from the horse's mouth. I mean, just talking to these nonprofits and understanding what their needs are, what they actually are doing. I tour facilities. I've also utilized information from the Volunteer Florida survey that you all had released earlier this year. I use some of those survey results in our marketing. So our communications when we are working to recruit volunteers, or kind of even understanding how to gain more volunteers. And I'll say some of those specifically was the result that said 47.2% of Floridians participated in community service through a religious organization. And I think our CareFest Community Service Event Day is a great example of that. It's something that we partner with a Christian nonprofit to do. And the goal is to not just get the community involved, but to get other places of worship involved. So even though it's, you know, one nonprofit that has their own beliefs, we're collaborating and we're inclusive to all. And I will say, getting those religious organizations is what really grows that reach. We have one church that their congregation is, you know, they have 150 volunteers alone that they all participate in this event. So it's very strong data. And then the other one is that 67.5% of volunteers that in Florida say that they love it because it enriches their lives and brings them joy. So that's why when they're applying to for a volunteer opportunity through the city, I'm communicating with them to find out what their actual interest is, because I want to align them with something that makes sense to them, that they're passionate about. I don't want to just place them to fill a need or a void somewhere. I want to actually put them where that organization, even if it's not the city, is able to retain them because they're actually interested in doing the work there.
You're gonna make me cry, Renee. I'm just so excited that it connected with you. And I'm thankful. I think all of you have participated or are aware of the survey. And Renee and Jessica, you all were both there at Tico Energy. So just wanted to mention that. Thank you, Sharon, for having the opportunity for me to share about it. But it's something that we know we can put out to the field. We had an opportunity funding wise to do it, but it does provide, in terms of what Sharon shared and Renee, some validity to what you all are already doing. And Renee is using that in a creative way, right? She's seeing that and saying, you know what, this backs up all what I already think, which is that faith-based entities are going to be a significant part of how we reach people so that they will volunteer, right? And that is so much of what Jessica does in general, especially with VOAD, is who are the folks that are doing this work already. And it confirms, you know, particularly I can say with the work that Jessica does, that is true. But thinking outside the box in terms of those, whether it's faith-based organizations or business associations, might be interested in. So we know that people volunteer through religious organizations. That doesn't mean they're only being an usher or working in the nursery there. What it means is they have a lot of the reputation and influence that can move through their congregation into their community for whatever the work is, like CareFest. But you have to develop those relationships in order to do that. And that's just a small part of the survey, but we're glad that that is helpful for you. That's a great example of what we want when we put something like that out there that is reliable, valid through University of Florida. And that I will make sure to send the link to when we finish up here. Renee, do you want to talk about training? Oh, you just did that. I'm sorry about that. So those of you who are, and I think it's all of you, are working with nonprofits and thinking about some of the differences there when it comes to structure of volunteerism, how you all view it as government entities, not versus, but alongside nonprofits. Are there significant policy components that you all seem to have that are more structured because you are in government? What are the differences that you feel like you see because of other sectors? It could be the private sector as well, but differences. You all are government entities. So it could be anything really, but what are you seeing about the fact that you're in a particular sector relative to either business or nonprofits, if that makes sense? Anyone can talk about that.
Hi, this is Rukmini. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I'm from the Guardian ad litem. We are in the 13th Circuit in Tampa, and we are a government entity. And, you know, we do belong to the local chamber here, the South Tampa Chamber of Commerce and other, you know, entities, but we are restricted very much by the government policies, so whatever the political climate is in Tallahassee, we have to kind of, go with that in terms of participation in different events or, um, eh, what our, what our messages to the public are messaging, our press releases, they all have to, even if we have to have a TV interview, all that kind of thing is very much monitored by central headquarters in Tallahassee.
Mhm.
So we are definitely, we have to toe kind of the party line.
Sure. That is significant. I see Christine nodding her head. This can be on a local scale, and that is a nonpartisan reality. It's whoever this component, that reality is wherever you are, local, regional, statewide. It varies in so many ways. So that one is great. So great in that I think that covers a lot. So for our panelists, other realities or differences when you think about either private sector, corporate social responsibility, and so on, or especially the independent sector, the nonprofit sector differences.
I'm happy to share. So I think even what the other woman brought up was, it made me think about on the local level, our department, we were just renamed recently Neighborhood Relations, but we've been Community Services prior to that for many years. And we've been lucky enough to have the support of our organization. And I will say, meeting other nonprofits, they are comprised, majority of them are volunteer ran. And I think a major difference is that they do not have so easily access to resources that I would have in local government. Oftentimes I'm not stressed to facilitate something because I do have the support of my organization, and we have a budget, and I have access to resources, while a nonprofit is going to have to fundraise and things of that nature in order to get the job done. So that was something that I have certainly notated as a difference.
I love that because people think a lot of times about the limited resources, which is true. I think a lot of the time, especially as Sharon talked about, thinking outside the box and needing sometimes the support dollar-wise for it, but also it comes in just creative ways of connecting and partnering with people. But again, government, it doesn't mean that the resources are limited in a way where you always are needing or hoping for more. It comes, which all four of you are talking about, with maximizing the work that you do, as well as empowering volunteers and other staff to do it, as well as knowing what you have budget-wise. Some of you may have that, hopefully all of you, and then working within that, but knowing that you do have this dollar amount. I know it can shift, but Renee, that's wonderful. And your community knowing that government is investing in volunteerism in ways that people can support the community is a wonderful reality. As Sharon was talking about, just making sure that you're able to share with the public all of these great things. And there's so much of that that's happening, Renee, in what you're talking about. So Christine, you were talking about, when we chatted, Volunteer Pro, some of the other resources. So really, when it comes to how are we telling other volunteer managers, or for ourselves, what is beneficial, right? Because working with volunteers, there's a lot of policy involved. There's a lot, especially what Jessica was talking about, especially when it comes to emergency management and disaster preparedness. There is a lot of education there. When Jessica was saying courses and so on, FEMA has courses, Jessica is talking, Christy is talking. She is doing FEMA courses all over. Christy, our emergency management director. Jessica has been leading the charge. Were you president of VOAD? I know you were on the board. Were you?
I'm chair currently.
Chair, you are, right. And people constantly want her to be chair forever, as do I. But she's leading the charge on these things. She has done so much training, relationship building. It's education. You cannot say, you know what, I'm pretty sure you can do this with a volunteer and good luck with that, especially because of the accountability you all have. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight that reality. Excuse me, in a lot of ways. So Renee, huge, thank you for explaining that and connecting that. Let me look real quickly. We have 5 museums that fall under the government, nonprofit, umbrella. I'm going to read this out loud. Umbrella. I have trouble forming partnerships with groups who have a contract, MOU, or signed document. I have tried working with this particular organization because they have a contract. It deters our partnership because our process takes so darn long. Document has to go to HR, county attorney. Okay, so this is really interesting because what this individual is talking about is how long it takes sometimes for government to approve something that you want to connect with. I will ask if anyone has now, when it's a flaming cannonball, and Christine, I'm going to use that all the time now. I already did a few minutes ago before we
Well, I'll
started.
chime in on her
Oh, okay.
question. The
Yeah.
way we have dealt with those things is to get the powers that be, your HR, your attorney, your board of commissions, to approve a template for those agreements. And then you can go out and sign as many of those agreements as you need to. We do have what we call citizen support organizations or friends groups, and each of those 83 organizations have a CSO agreement with us, and the secret sauce was getting it honed down to a template that covers the statutes and the directives from our Department of Environmental Protection, yada, yada. You can imagine how many layers we have as well. And because we are governor's agencies, you get approval for that. And then I use it for all 83 organizations, or if a new one wants to come on board. So I'll just leave it at that to answer that question.
That's huge. And that's what we have as well. And because you're on the other side, a gentle coaxing of this, right? Bringing that to leadership in a nuanced way. I know that part is something you would have to think about, but we do the same thing. We have a very clear MOU. And then part of that is if we're not seeing what we have asked for, then contracts are terminated because you have that expectation between two entities. Ideally, I know, Christine, there's a lot there. So I'm using the word nuance with, some of that, but I like that point. Okay, so I wanted to talk about, I do want to talk about policy just for a second, and this doesn't have to be everyone, but there are things similar to what was just mentioned in terms of what's coming down, so to speak, from leadership, what you're hearing, and then kind of translating that to others. So I was curious about that, Sharon, you talked about priorities that come from leadership and then having to shift very quickly with that. Jessica, you talk, certainly there is so much of that with EM. But shifting gears, pivoting, so to speak, when it comes to what the individuals who have some authority over what you do, managing that and then disseminating that information, especially when it's fast. How do you handle that? Because there's a lot of it. It can be policy, legislatively, it could be at, Florida admin code. It could be, we just want to do this. So pivoting, what does that look like for anyone? Jessica,
You know,
yeah.
Yeah, if I could just add in, I think as government representatives who work with our nonprofit community, we have a responsibility to be their advocate for our leadership. And that responsibility includes being able to intelligently talk about what they bring, the value that they bring, that cost associated to that. I mentioned earlier, during a disaster, 1 hour of volunteer work is worth $27. So if you have a volunteer that's working 10 hours a day, times a week, that's a value that it's bringing to your government that they can't get from anywhere else. And so if we can intelligently relay that information to our leadership, we're missing our gap, right? We are that liaison between our nonprofit, our volunteers, those resources in our leadership. And if we create a culture where we're constantly promoting the good work that our volunteers are doing and our organizations are doing, then our leadership will start to get that and understand that. But I feel as government workers who engage with nonprofits and volunteers, that's part of our responsibility to do.
Very well said, Jessica. The advocacy component. And Jessica, especially with EM, the nuance involved in that. And I think that's for all of you, nuance in a big word, capturing everything way, that you have to look at what your relationship is with leadership and make decisions about how to approach them. And that's in the nonprofit world as well. A lot of what we do, and Service Enterprise, which is a wonderful program that we're launching, is all about making sure that volunteerism is a core component of the work that the organization does, and how to advocate, how to have the right statistics and information that really broadens and gives that value, in addition to number of volunteers and number of hours. So we have a lot about that. I think we're going to be doing a training on that in October. So we see how that, exactly what Jessica said, having a set of information that is going to register with your leadership. And that you can boldly and assertively share those things because you have the backing, what it is, exactly like the dollar amount. If you know that that is something that's significant in your leadership and that's what they're looking at, I am happy to give you a number of different ROI, return on investment, Excel documents. Now, they're all cells that you enter and then it does the summing, because I don't do math really. That's why I got a master's in social work. There wasn't a lot of math involved. It was rigorous, but just no math. But it has these varying ways for you to give the statistics or the information that your leadership will need. And so Jessica gets that information from nonprofits and can put that in, she can condense that and be proactive about it, in addition to numbers. So she's got qualitative information. Here's what nonprofits are saying. And she has quantitative information. She's got specific numbers that are going to be beneficial and that she can use whenever something happens, right? She's got that prepared and ready to use. as opposed to necessarily, I mean, we all scramble in certain ways, but she's always pulling that information in terms of VOAD, her personal, it connects professionally, but this is a nonprofit organization that she's chair of. And she's able to get more information, have that influence, and bring it in to the work that she does. So others with pivoting quickly, if you hear the, if the cannonball smashes or is incoming.
I'll chime in real quick, Jovita. I manage a volunteer standing team that's the team that you presented the survey to. And a lot of times I have a representative from every section, every division across the agency. And our role is to always take a look at policies. Our role is to always be prepared and thinking what's the best way to handle a situation that involves a volunteer or intern. And so sometimes if something pivots on a policy or something like that, I'll get notified. And if I do have ample time, I do like to bring it to the team because I like to get that feedback from the team on some recommendations that we can make to leadership about shifting the policy from this to this. Sometimes though, those things don't happen, but I can pull from a lot of previous knowledge and relationship building that I have with folks across the agency that I could say, okay, I really feel like this is the best path for this particular policy, and this is the way we recommend, or I recommend, my volunteer team recommends that it should go. I know, for example, with when COVID came about, our role was to think of the volunteers and interns. A lot of leadership was putting together policies for employees. And so we brought everybody together to say, hey, we have over 3,000 volunteers that are going to be just as impacted. So that brought that component to the table. It brought a lot of good work, but it was something that, leadership was thinking employees, which is valid, but we're thinking volunteers, interns. They bring so much to the community. They bring so much to our work. So alongside what was happening with employees, we worked to develop those policies, and of course we have guidelines and statutes that we have to remember and interpret, as Christine had said. So those are always challenging too, because sometimes you get different interpretations, and what you thought was the way a policy should be interpreted 4 years ago, it may change. So you have to navigate that, and that can be challenging sometimes as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Sharon and Jessica on that. I wanted to go to you, Renee, just because you're connecting with different departments. And again, with the kind of relationship building, I wanted to shift gears real quickly on you had talked about when we discussed things that nonprofits then come to you because you've developed the relationship. So benefits to the work that you've done, right? Because everybody, all of you are talking about that reach and then relationships. And Renee, just some of the return on investment for you when it comes to the relationships that you've developed. I know you had mentioned, people giving you their calendar and saying, these things are coming up, so please promote them, because we know that's your need, is to get as many volunteer opportunities out as possible. So other things you've seen that have been beneficial coming back your way because of the work that you do?
I would just say trust and just growing the program in general. The more I'm connecting with these people and helping them, I mean, we get so many different types of calls or asks or connections. One specifically we just had is one of our neighborhood associations. They have this residential development with residents that turn over with that somehow have this almost new furniture, and they don't have anywhere to donate it. So when I started reaching out about CareFest, this association manager reached out to me and talked about this need. And so we're working with St. Vincent de Paul Thrift Store to see about taking on this furniture donation. So I would just say, just being that resource, you know, we're a big organization similar to the other women on this call. So I think that it just builds a lot of trust in government when you have an actual live person that you can reach out to that will respond to you and will actually help you with your need. You know, that's the barrier and stereotype that we work every day to break down.
That's huge. And I see a lot of nodding from the other panelists in terms of the trust part, which comes both from policy being what it needs to be, you know, Sharon saying, we got to update this thing, and having the direction that people need, but also the qualitative, the informal components, trust, that relationship building, all of that. So all that combined is what you all seem to be talking about very regularly. I do next want to, it's boring, kind of like policy, but also flaming cannonball style. But every one of you talks about tracking your information and how critical that is. I'm pretty sure all of you in some way have to track number of volunteers either across the state, in a county, or, you know, collectively with VOAD, or explain that that's important. Wanted to just ask, you know, software, who's feeding into that information? How do you, you know, Jessica, with FEMA, how does that work? How can, you know, our cities doing that? But, you know, we only have a few more minutes, but that part is really huge for data purposes. And I think probably all of you have to do that in some way. We have to do that as well because of our fund, you know, where we're getting, what's the other state agency we're getting our funding from. So what does tracking look like for all of you? Because I know it is in some ways required depending on what your role is. So.
I guess
I
I'll
mean, I'll
chime
s-
in.
oh.
A volunteer management system, you know, we
Yeah.
used to do it all by spreadsheet, and that's just ridiculous.
That sounds painful.
Yeah, one of the first things I did getting in this position in 2011 was go down the road of finding a volunteer management system.
Got it.
Priceless.
Yes. And so everybody's entering information into that across the state. Correct?
Yes, and one of the key things is getting volunteers to enter their hours into the system. So
That's a tough
self-enter, so
one.
the staff don't have to spend that time.
So that is something that in training, all of that, the volunteer managers there are having to emphasize and say, you know, because you can't control what other folks are doing, but trying to pull that information is a big part of things. Jessica.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a little bit different for us, right? Because we're taking hundreds of organizations who some are major, like Red Cross Salvation Army, that have robust programs. And then some are these kind of community homegrown, what we call pop-up disaster organizations that rush into a community.
Yep.
So we're working on kind of those newer groups that are a little less structured, one, educating the value of capturing that information. And then I think, you know, these smaller groups, it's overwhelming. How do I know what to do? How am I tracking all of this? If you want to capture your information that can be usable for county or state in emergencies, you need your volunteer name, the hours, the date, the location, and what they did. That's simple. So if you think, oh, we can't do this, it's not going to be worth it. Those 5 things on a spreadsheet, on a notebook, piece of paper, etc., the county can then take that and they can then submit that to FEMA to use for their cost match, which is a big thing. And I keep talking about that, but when a disaster hits, each county is responsible for a percentage of the cost of that to be reimbursed back to FEMA. Well, that, as you can imagine, gets really high really quick. I mean, millions of dollars we're talking. And so if you could bring to your county emergency manager 1,000 hours of volunteer work that you did and you've got it all documented, they can put a value associated with that that will go towards that $1 million match. And I can tell you, it
Mhm.
doesn't happen often because it's a lot of work and it's overwhelming and we're working on that education component. But if you remember the Joplin, Missouri tornado,
Yep.
and it was easier because it was a smaller area, they were able to meet their entire cost match on volunteer hours. So if you're a commissioner, imagine what that value of the volunteer brings, because now you can say your taxpayers, we don't have to pay for a cent of this because our volunteers did it. That's powerful. That's powerful to commissioners. That's powerful to decision makers. So tracking that has an incredible value. So even if you're just starting with those 5 things, that's 5 things you can start with that have a huge impact on all sorts of pieces of your community.
You guys hear that? And Jessica said at the beginning, she's doing education with nonprofits, with other government entities, that everyone is touched by this. Now, the goal is not to have any disasters, but if we do, Christine has 20,000 volunteers, Sharon has thousands. Renee, you have people that come in from your other departments or from CareFest, that those are, hopefully everyone on the call seeing how valuable volunteer work is just huge. So wanted to thank you guys for talking about kind of the volunteer management side of things. I know, Sharon, you also have software and so on, but I know that we are running out of time. I will ask each of these folks, I try to be sensitive to this, if they want to connect directly with people in terms of their email address, if they have other individuals in their organization that they would like to reference, and I can send you that. I will certainly send the websites for each of their organizations so you can browse and copy and paste ideas from. Some of you may just have some really great kind of brainstormy ideas that could be beneficial for them as well. But I hope that you all are connecting and are aware of how extraordinary each of these individuals are, working tirelessly, both on the structured side of things and on the relationship side of these, because all of that is combined. And almost everything that we hear is very much like a nonprofit, very much like corporate social responsibility in the structure in the private sector. Renee, as she mentioned, is a liaison with the private sector and other neighborhood associations. So almost everything that we talked about really has to do with the community. It's not just customer service where somebody is, has a problem with their particular, something specific in the state or in a county. There are so many proactive things that the government is doing across sectors and is advocating for and is purposeful with, that I think is just so important for all of us to see and comprehend and be purposeful about. If you're a government entity, thinking outside the box, thinking about what you've heard here, connecting with these folks, other people in your whatever the government entity is that you have. Christine, I believe, talked about, or might have been Sharon, there are people who don't have any official role in volunteer management, but see the value of it and want to participate and connect with her about that. Sharon, it may have been you. So I hope you all can give a clap to these panelists for being really just wonderful human beings and serving our state through state government, right? This isn't partisan, this isn't, they're navigating a lot of things, but across, whether it's administrations and so on, they are doing this work and pushing, not pushing, but are assertive about the really critical missions that they have and are doing really excellent work for you all, for all of us, so that Florida is a wonderful place to work, live, and play. Just gotta throw that out there. So a special thank you to all of you for just being ready when I asked. And you can see these folks are just rattling this stuff off. They don't have to think about any of it because it's so ingrained in what they do. They're the experts in all of this. So I want to thank you all. This is going to be, this is recorded and it will be online within the next week. I will send an email. Hopefully you'll complete our short survey on what you thought about it, and then also share some resources with you all as you all. Thank you for sharing in the chat your contact information. So I want to say goodbye. Sorry, I was 2 minutes over, but I'm a chatter. I think that was pretty great, relatively speaking. You guys can see your thanks there. We got a good clap. So I appreciate all 4 of you. Thank you for participating and taking this time. I will send you a $5 gift card for Starbucks. I think I can only do 25 and under. But I think that can buy you like 2/3 of a really fancy latte, but you guys deserve it. Oh, and the stamp. That's a lot of work as well, but you all deserve it. Thank you for your support of kind of the training that we try to do. So you guys are wonderful. I appreciate you. I hope everyone has a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Y'all take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.